She's committed to creating a world where people live and lead with connection, courage, and joy. Take a moment to welcome Sara Mueller.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. When I first met Julie, I was like one of those bobblehead figurines that some people put on the dashboard of their cars. She was explaining to me about the Fabulous Ladies of Naples and the incredible community that she has co-created, and talking about the women that were coming to her events and how they were successful and beautiful and have these wonderful lives. And we're wanting something more. We're wanting some deeper meaning. And we're even lonely, even though some of the women might not have said that they actually felt lonely. So as Julie is explaining this to me, I'm nodding my head, I'm leaning in, I'm nodding my head even more, because everything that she was saying is exactly what I have heard for over 8 years of coaching high-performing executives, both women and men, by the way. It is very clear that we are starved for connections. We are lonely, even though we are always surrounded by so many people and we're so busy. We even had the Surgeon General last year put out an advisory that our country is going through a public health crisis of loneliness, disconnection, and isolation. He called it an epidemic of loneliness. And we're busy. Right? We're checking off our to-do lists. We have all these friends, hundreds and hundreds of them on our Facebook and our LinkedIn and our Instagram. So it seems like we are connected to people. We even know what our friends are having for breakfast and lunch and dinner sometimes because they're posting it. But we are missing out on that human-to-human connection. A lot of what's happening here tonight, and I've had the privilege of being able to experience chatting with some of you already. We are missing that raw, that authentic, that real connection. Those juicy relationships that people who are at the end of their life on their deathbed regret and wish they would have spent more time and effort into nourishing those type of relationships. And so I can recognize this disconnection. I understand this loneliness. I was experiencing this when I really began my emotional intelligence journey 15 years ago. So on paper, my life looked really great. I had just married my college sweetheart. We had bought a new home. We had renovations underway. I had a big career, a corporate job where I was getting paid a big salary to travel the world for both work and pleasure. But behind the smile on my face and the I've got it all figured out, I've got it all together persona, I was hiding the fact that I was extremely burnt out. I was stressed out and thinking about my job all the time, even though I was a high performer. I was struggling to get out of bed in the morning because even though I had so many people that were dependent on me. And then I was drinking a glass or sometimes a bottle of wine every single night to pretend that I wasn't feeling as unfulfilled as I was. So this was going on for many months. And I finally realized that something had to change. So I decided to quit this big corporate job that I have and go teach yoga. So I quit the big corporate job and I went to go teach yoga full-time, thinking that a more peaceful type job like yoga would be the answer to all of my challenges. What I found after teaching yoga for just a few months is that nothing had really changed in my life. I was still stressed out. I was still burnt out. And really the only thing that had changed was now my paycheck was much, much smaller. And it was right at this time that I hit a rock bottom in my marriage with my husband. And I wanted to point my finger at him, from this place of hurt, this place of blame. I wanted to blame him for the state of our marriage. But I had a mindful moment, and I recognized that I was the common denominator in all that wasn't working in my life. And so I took that finger that felt so good to point out at him, and I pointed it back at myself. And I recognized that if anything in my life was to change, I had to take radical responsibility for all of the outcomes of my life. And I began then that journey of emotional intelligence and self-mastery. I worked with business and mindset coaches. I worked with mindfulness teachers and therapists. I really learned how to get out of my own way and how to love and accept myself so that I could connect with my authentic self, and in doing so, be able to connect with others, the teams that I led, the people that I had relationships with, personal or professional. So I took these new skills of emotional intelligence back to my corporate job. I went back to the big job, but this time I had more success, I had more joy, I was making more in profit share, I was working less hours. It was a good result. I also took these emotional intelligence skills to my relationship with my husband, who went on his own emotional intelligence journey, and we were able to come back together and heal our marriage. And so there is data over the last many, many decades from institutions like Harvard and Yale and Learning in Action and American HR experts that really backs up what I just shared, that emotional intelligence is a tool that helps us to have success in our lives, both personally and professionally. And what I want to share with you in this short time that I have with you tonight is how we can take some of the foundations of emotional intelligence and apply that to ourselves, to our own lives, so that we can better connect with ourselves and with one another. So whether that's later on tonight while we're dancing and having a great time at this party, whether that's with your family over the holidays, or whether it's with the teams that you lead. So what is emotional intelligence? I've talked to a few people about it tonight. Some of you have heard of it, some of you haven't. I'll give you a very brief overview. Essentially, emotional intelligence is being able to know and understand ourselves and being able to manage ourselves and our emotions so that our emotions don't hijack our intended behavior, and so that we can better influence and communicate with others, whether that's personally or professionally. There are 4 pillars of emotional intelligence: self-awareness, self-management, others awareness, and relationship management. And we're going to walk through each one of those pillars now. So the first pillar is self-awareness. Self-awareness is really about understanding yourself, knowing who you are, knowing your strengths and your weaknesses and your triggers and your patterns. It's also about having a large emotional vocabulary, which data shows most of us do not. The reason that it's important for us to have an emotional vocabulary is because our emotions are really driving the decisions that we make, whether we like to admit it or not. But most of us don't want to feel our emotions because some of these emotions that we have don't feel so good, right? And a lot of us like to instead numb out our emotions, to shove them down, to scroll them away, to work them away, to pretend that they're not there. But I want to share with you what happens when we do that. So I'm going to use this beach ball, and we're all so lucky to live here in Southwest Florida and get to play with beach balls on a regular basis. But what happens when I take this beach ball and let's say I'm hanging out at the pool and I decide to shove this beach ball down underneath the water. I put it down underneath the water in the pool. What happens to the beach ball? Does it stay underneath the water? It pops up, right? And it breaks a light fixture, it knocks over someone's glass of wine, it hits someone in the face, and then I have a big mess to clean up. So that's what happens with our emotions. When we shove our emotions down and pretend that they aren't there, the emotion comes out sideways, maybe 10 minutes later, and we end up yelling at someone that we don't want to yell at. It might show up 10 days later when we cry in a meeting, or again, we take our stress out on someone that we care about. Our emotions could also show up 10 years later in the form of an illness or disease. What we know from medical research is that 95 plus of illnesses are related to stress. And when we're suppressing our emotions, when we're shoving them down, we aren't allowing ourselves to have health. We're in chronic stress. So what we want to do instead is we want to look at our emotions as data. My Harvard professor calls them messengers, data for how to take action. If I am feeling guilt, that means that I want to make a change. If I'm feeling angry, that means that I want to take a stand against something. If I'm feeling joy, that means this is something that's in alignment for me and I should do more of. If I'm feeling lonely, then I should go join and come out to the Fabulous Ladies of Naples events. If I don't notice these feelings, I can't take action on them. Even something like jealousy, that's a feeling that we're not supposed to feel in our culture. But I remember being jealous of people that had written a book. And if I would have, pretended that emotion wasn't there and said, oh, that's not a pretty emotion, I should just forget about it, I wouldn't have realized that the data from that feeling of jealousy is that I actually myself wanted to write a book. And so I took action and I sat my booty down in a chair and I got my laptop out and I started writing my book that I published earlier this year and is for sale if you'd like to come get a signed copy later this evening. Thank you. Thank you. So our emotions are data. When we can embrace them, they tell us how to take action. The second pillar of emotional intelligence is self-management. Self-management is how we create resilience when adversity happens to us. It's how we create balance, even if we are working a job that has a lot of hours or we have a lot going on with our lifestyles. Self-management are things that we really all know that we should be doing, like getting a good night's sleep, exercising, taking time to relax. But what happens often with our good intentions is our mind gets in the way. We experience what I like to call head hurricanes. So I have a friend named Vicky, and she has children that are similar age to my kids. And I sent her a text message a couple years ago, and I invited her and her kids to come over for a happy hour play date at my house. And Vicky is one of those people that's really quick on her phone. When I send a text message, she replies almost immediately, which sometimes it takes me a day or longer to reply to someone's text. So I sent Vicky this text message, inviting her to come over for a happy hour play date, and she didn't respond. But I had a lot going on. I had work to do, so I went to my work, checked my phone. A couple hours later, still no response from Vicky. That's weird, I thought. I wonder if something happened. Again, it was a work day. I had things to do, so I went back to my work. A couple hours later, checked my phone. Again, there's no response from Vicky. Did I do something to make her mad? Oh my gosh, I forgot to ask how her mother-in-law was doing the last time that we were together. My goodness, how could I have been so selfish? How could I not be such a good friend? I've been trying to build these friendships here in Naples. What is wrong with me? And all of a sudden I'm in this head hurricane space that I've created. Imagine how I felt the next day when Vicky said to me, oh my gosh, I would love to come over for a happy hour play date. I was in a training all day yesterday and I couldn't respond. I felt pretty silly, and I had wasted all of that time and energy in this head hurricane space. So what we need to understand is that our mind will often undermine our great intentions. What we need to do instead is to recognize when we're in head hurricane and instead communicate from the neutral facts. Speak to others even tonight about the neutral facts versus that story, that head hurricane that we're making up. So with emotional intelligence, once we move through the first and second pillar of emotional intelligence, we understand ourselves, we're managing ourselves, we now get to focus on others. The third pillar of EQ is others awareness. And if there were one word to sum up this pillar, it would be empathy. It would be being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. It would be understanding different perspectives, especially when they're different from your own. You know, we see a lot of empathy even being demonstrated here tonight. There are a lot of husbands and partners coming out for the members of the Fabulous Ladies of Naples. And an example of the empathy is saying, you know, hey, I might want my wife to be around, but gosh, I see her go to these events and come back and she's lit up and I know this serves her, so this serves me. That's an example of empathy and supporting your partner who is a member and comes out to these Fabulous Ladies of Naples events. One of the things that makes empathy so hard is that it really requires us to be good listeners. And just given the culture that we live in, given how many responsibilities we all have, it's hard for a lot of us to be really good at listening. Often what we are doing is, instead of listening to understand, we are listening to respond, or we're listening to be right, or we're listening to fix, which is what I experience a lot of. But when we listen to fix, when we jump in, when someone has just shared something challenging with us and we say, oh my gosh, that happened to me too. Or we say, well, here's what I think you should do about it. This should work. What that does when we are a leader, for example, is we are building a team of disempowered employees that are dependent on us as the leader and don't know how to innovate within their organization. What that does for us in our personal relationships is it blocks connection. What we know is one of the deepest human being needs is to belong. And we feel like we belong when we are seen, we are heard, and we are understood. When we are fixing when someone is talking instead of listening, the other person often doesn't feel seen, heard, and understood. I remember when I was telling my friend about the challenges that my husband and I were going through that I spoke to you about earlier, and all she did was grab my hand, look me in the eye, and just listen. She didn't say anything. In fact, what could she even have said to make anything better at that time? There was nothing. But she was with me, and she helped me feel understood, which allowed me to process and move on. And so as we think about this third pillar of EQ, can we just zip our lips a little bit longer, hold back that urge to fix, to be right, and instead listen and really see, hear, and understand the people in front of us so that we can build connections? This leads us to our final pillar of EQ, which is relationship management. This is where the magic of leadership happens when we're speaking about leadership, because you are leading with inspiration and pulling the greatness out of people rather than leading with fear or shame that we saw a lot of in the 20th century. You are having those tough love conversations and holding people accountable to high performance. And in our personal relationships, you are connecting with a human being to human being. The challenge about this final pillar, though, is that it really requires courage, right? It requires courage as a leader to have those tough conversations. And in fact, the data shows that most leaders are not. Executives are actively avoiding conflict nearly 80% plus of the time when you look at any data on conflict within organizations, even at the highest executive levels. And what we find with courage, actually, I'm seeing courage being demonstrated here with all of you, because you could have seen the events of the Fabulous Ladies of Naples on Facebook, and you could watch and you could connect with other women in that Facebook group, but you had the courage to actually sign up for an event like this and show up. Right? And not only that, but you have the courage to come in and, like so many of you did when I got here today, walk up, introduce yourself, and say hi. We don't know how someone's going to respond, but so many of you did that, and we all have the courage to do that. Or to tell someone information about yourself when you don't know how they're going to respond, whether that's going to build connection or maybe not connect. But we have the courage, and we do that. And so as we are heading into a new year of 2025, I wish for you and for your loved ones to have the emotional intelligence to open your heart to tremendous courage, to deep connections, and to oodles and oodles and oodles of joy. Thank you.
You need to give it a little credit.